He was Jeff Wild's captain for years. He was like Jeff Wild's mentor. And the funny thing is you can't come across two more opposite people.
So,
Hey, Cahill.
Okay.
We're still standing around chatting.
Give me an intro.
The fire service is a lifestyle. Some of us grew up knowing that this is what we would do. Others found it later in life. We all have a story to tell. We live a career of experience and knowledge. But what happens when we retire? All that knowledge and experience walks out the door. Welcome to Capture the Knowledge. Hello Metro Fire, Jeff Malinowski here on Capture the Knowledge. Today we've got Kyle Thomas, who is a retired Metro Fire member. Kyle, you worked
6 years.
26 years
Yep.
For
Paid.
predecessor agencies.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you retired out of Metro Fire in 2014.
Yep. August 14th of 2014.
All right, to the date.
To the date. I was
All right.
hired August 11th.
Wow.
So, yeah, I tried to get it as close as possible.
So the math worked out.
Yeah, math worked out. Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Kyle and I are going to talk about a little bit of his history at Metro Fire, and then we're going to dive into truck stuff. We've got a lot of truck things to talk about. You spent a large part of your career
Yep.
on the truck.
Yeah.
So why don't we start off with a little bit of your history, how you got into the fire service, and what you did over your years, and then we'll get into some specifics.
Yeah. So out of high school, I went to the University of Nebraska. I was a natural resource major with the intent of becoming a game warden. And didn't work out in Nebraska, so I came back to California and was working. My oldest brother was racing motorcycles at the time. And while he was rebuilding an engine, he had a bunch of his friends in the garage. A guy drives by, gets out of a brand new Toyota Celica. This is 1984. And starts talking. I didn't know who the person was. Starts talking with the rest of the guys, and then leaves and drives off. Pretty much everybody said, that guy's got it made. And I turned to one guy and said, why's that? He says, well, he's a fireman. I go, what does that mean? And they said, he makes enough to take care of himself, never going to be rich, but he has enough time to do whatever he wants. And I later found out that the guy was working out at Moffett Field. He was a federal firefighter, and they were working 72-hour, still do, I guess, 72-hour work week. So that put the seed in my head of, I want enough to take care of myself and have enough time to do whatever it is I want to do.
You want the Toyota Celica.
I wanted the Toyota Celica. Actually, at that time, it was the Toyota SR5 pickup with a Brahma shell and a carpet kit.
Perfect.
Yeah. So in '85, I enrolled at Mission College. It was an introduction to the fire service. He sat a bunch of us around a table, and he asked us, where do you want to work? And guys are going around the table saying, I want to work for San Jose because they fight fire. And guys were saying, a lot of them said Santa Clara because they were the highest paid at the time. There was one guy there that wanted to work for the Forest Service because he liked the outdoors. And the question came to me. I was kind of thinking Nebraska, but what came to my mind was, look, I'll wherever I'm hired, that's where I want to work. I want to get into the industry. And he said something to me that he didn't say to anybody else, and that was, you'll get a job. And I was super encouraged. So I started the process. This is in a time where 3,000 to 5,000 people are applying for 1 to 2 jobs. San Francisco had a consent decree. Reno had a consent decree, meaning that because of past hiring practices, they were required to hire a certain number of protected classes. Started testing, came out number 1 in Reno. Wasn't selected because I wasn't a protected class. Consent decrees apparently are no longer legal. I don't know for sure, but in '86, January of '86, I got selected. I can't say hired because they didn't pay, but I got selected for the City of Campbell's reserve program. This was resume building, right? And man, my first set of turnouts.
Feels good, doesn't it?
Oh my God. It was like, yeah, this arrival. I've made it. Was working in a grocery store at the time. I had gotten married in June of '86, still married, same person. Yeah. And continued testing, and then in July of '88, I got hired by Rancho Cordova. My actual hire date was the 11th of August of 1988, the day we started the academy. I remember coming through the doors here and sitting down in the chief's interview.
At this building?
At this building. I sat down next to Don Carroll, and he was, his typical self. He's kind of goofy. Mm-hmm. I had come out number 16 on the list, and they were hiring 12. I asked Don where he came out, and he came out number 1. And I said, "Oh, he's number 1? I got a chance." But yeah, so I went through the academy with him, and so that was August of 1986. Rancho Cordova, one of the reasons I was hired was there was a ballot measure that was billed as not a tax, but it was an increase to funding to the Fire Protection District. And that had not passed when we had gotten hired. So although we're in the academy, it was really hinged based on whether this would pass or not. I'm confident the district had a plan in case it didn't pass. Mm-hmm. But the funding was secured when it did pass in November, which was that was kind of interesting in retrospect. We're hired, we don't know about this.
You're on the bubble.
We're on the bubble, yeah. And so anyway, we get hired in July of '89. Rancho and Citrus Heights merge. Throughout my probation, I'm working in Rancho. At the time, we were assigned 1 month in each station. So that's 62, 63, 64, 65. 66 had not been built yet, and 61.
I'm going to interrupt you here for just a second. Do you think getting rotated around as a probationary helped you out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because the biggest advantage was, so when I came out of the academy, I went to 63. Believe it or not, we had 4-person staffing. Every engine had 4 on it at that time in Rancho. Captain was Jim Saunders at 63. The firefighter, or the the firefighter was Ron Rahm, and the engineer was Dave Pickett. So I'm coming in as a probationary firefighter, and all 3 of them had been on the fire service with Rancho Cordova prior to my birth.
We don't have much of that anymore.
Yeah, which was fascinating because I was waiting for the day when I could say the same thing. And the year I retired, there was a couple of guys that had been born in '87 or '88. And so it's like, I'm there, I've made it. I've been in the service longer than these have been alive. But anyway, so the question was, do you think there's value in rotating through stations, particularly as a probationary? And my answer is absolutely yes. That captain and that crew had more experience than I'd been alive. My next station was similar, but I remember getting to 61. Dennis Sweeney was the captain, and he had just been promoted that February, I think. So pretty recent. He had less than a year on as a captain. Those perspectives are definitely different. Somebody who's less than a year as a captain, somebody who's been in the fire service longer than you've been alive. So yeah, having that perspective and those different personalities, it really depends on the agency. Historically, the 2 agencies that were the most similar were Florin and Rancho Cordova. And I've talked to Mike Ernst and many guys from Florin and said, had Rancho and Florin merged, that would have been a major stumbling block or challenge to get all of the agencies together. We would have had a significant amount of financial infrastructure. The growth was both in Florin and Rancho.
because those two departments would have meshed so well?
Very similar backgrounds. They were tight. And as an example, A shift, I don't know if B and C shift did this, but in Rancho, A shift, every weekend, Saturday or Sunday, if we were coming to work, we'd have breakfast. We'd gather at breakfast at Brookfield's and show up there at 7, I think. We were usually served by 7, finished by 7:30, went to our stations. But the entire department, A shift, would have breakfast together.
Did everybody live pretty close by?
So that's a significant issue that's occurred. And I completely understand. But when I was hired, there was a requirement to live within, at the time, it was an hour's driving distance from Station 61. That was a restriction. Dan Nalen, who was in my class, was right at the limit. I think he lived down in Stockton or so. When we merged with Citrus Heights, that went away. Before, the requirements got more lenient. Originally was you had to live within the boundaries of the agency. The saying was it transitioned from a community-based to a commuter-based personnel.
I think something that we wonder is how do we get some of that back?
So one of the interesting things that I saw towards the end of my career was the hiring of locals, particularly people from the Russian community or Ukrainian community. How do you sell it to the people that you serve that this is where you should work? You've lived here, you've grown up here, and that was pretty common before. There was plenty of guys that went to Rancho Cordova High that worked in the fire service. My hero and mentor was a guy named Lynn Hansen. He grew up he was actually born in Deadwood, South Dakota, but he grew up in Azusa, and he got hired in Azusa Fire, so he knew everything, but his goal was to eventually move to, not Astoria, Corvallis. And one of his guys that he worked with was a guy named John Bokinko. And he came up here and started in Rancho. And Lynn moved up, tested, got hired, bought a house on Ambassador, and never left. Had his first kid. And, well, he actually did leave when he retired. He died of Parkinson's. My wife has Parkinson's. My stepdad died of Parkinson's. It's a weird disease.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Got to take advantage of our youth and enjoy it while we're able.
Yeah. Just had a guy pass away 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine, pancreatic cancer. Same thing Jeff Vitti died of. 3 months. Jeff, I think, was 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
quick.
yeah. Hey, so bottom line, when you retire, I know we all look at retirement as something to shoot for. Plan out your retirement to make the most of what you want to do. Retire young enough that you can do that.
Your fire service career was basically half before 9/11
Yep.
and half after 9/11.
Yep.
And we talked a little bit earlier about what that meant.
Yeah.
What changes did you see?
So it definitely changed the country's perspective on firefighting or firefighters. I was talking to somebody the other day. Prior to 9/11, I didn't know a single person that had a tattoo that said 343 on it. But that's a significant number to many people, and they'll put it on their arm as a remembrance. There's nothing wrong with that. But what occurred during the same time period was social media and this ability to brand yourself and to publish who you want the rest of the world or how you want the rest of the world to view you and edit out all the bad stuff. Prior to 9/11, we didn't have, the internet was there, but it wasn't as accessible, available. You didn't have this publishing of who you are. I bring this up because I don't know a single person in the world that has a tattoo that says 1177. Do you have any reference to that?
You're putting me on the spot now.
Yeah, I am, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
It's the number of Marines and sailors that died on the USS Arizona instantly when a bomb hit their ammunition and the whole ship blew up and sunk. Actually came up out of the water. My grandparents were in World War II. My dad was in Korea. There isn't this boasting of, look at us. They don't have an 1177. They may have an anchor. But 9/11 coupled with the idea of being able to edit who you are on a social media platform really changed the people that we hire, the people that want to become firefighters. Is there a good reason to be a firefighter? I don't think the pay and the retirement system that we have is a bad reason by any stretch of the imagination. That's why I got hired. But to be able to tell other people, to sit on the glory of 343 people's deaths, I don't buy it.
Do you think there's any sort of remembrance aspect of it? Because I do the stair climb,
Yeah,
and I've got a couple of the shirts, and I wear the
Right.
T-shirt around, not so much as a look at me thing, but
right.
as a remembrance thing.
So that's a very good point, and I agree with it. But at what point, where down the line do we stop remembering? I'll give you an example. Can you tell me the birth years of your grandparents? Do you know the names of your great-grandparents? And then start going down that. Unless you're interested in genealogy, beyond the immediate people that we've met and know, we don't remember. So at some point, there will be a time where we stop doing the 9/11 climbs. Does that mean we forget? The impact that has taken place on the fire service, I think, will have its memories. I was saying that we had 4 people on every engine in Rancho. We had 2 people on the truck. So there was 2 trucks, one at 65, one at 62, and it was staffed by an engineer and a firefighter. And there was a saw on every engine. So truck ops that were done were generally performed by second in engine. So their job was to secure water supply and then ladder the roof. Trucks were dispatched on an as-needed basis. One of the big things in this equation is that we had a squad at 61, and that was staffed by 2 firefighters, and all of the extrication equipment was on that squad. Not to be confused with the squads that were run in Citrus Heights. Citrus Heights had a squad at 23, one at 28, I think. I can't remember where they were, but they were a shorter unit, and they responded basically as a ladderless truck, in addition to extrication. So there was a truck at 24 and a truck at 21. But they ran those with a full complement, captain, engineer, firefighter.
That was in the late 80s, early 90s,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
When did we start staffing trucks with full crews, and why?
So I'll answer the first question. It was probably about the time when we had boundary drops. So in order to get on the same page with all of the agencies, the city was the lead on that. They had 4 people trucks. In order for the boundary to drop and us to respond into them and their agencies, there had to be similarities. So I'm going to say mid to late 90s, say 95, 96, when boundaries were dropped and we started doing truck ops, staffing trucks with 3 people and then eventually with 4. I think the 4th person in county came on the truck when we merged with American River. That was a fascinating merger. And I had a significant role in it, because at the time I was a shift rep for Sacramento County. And we were given the responsibility, both agencies were given the responsibility to write up a contract. Brian Rice was the unit rep in American River. Dennis Sweeney was the unit rep in Sacramento County. Local 522 said this merger would not come on the backs of labor. We're all for it, but we're not giving up a thing, which is kind of interesting because there's a story there.
Okay. The story behind everything.
Yeah. So the responsibility came down to both me and Pat Cook to blend the contracts. And it was fairly simple. I had 2 Word documents, and I cut and paste what I thought was the best. It was fascinating going through the articles. Most IAFF contracts are from a boilerplate, right? It's something that's pre-written, and then you can adjust it as to your needs, delete or whatever. Sure. So both of these contracts were formatted very similar. Article 1's always going to be a preamble, and so it was exactly the same. But getting into staffing issues, getting into time off. So one of the bigger ones was Sacramento County had compensatory time off, CTO and PTO, rather than vacation and sick leave. Chief Martinez made it clear. He said, look, I can't deal with that, because if you bank your hours in comp time and then take it in comp time, you're getting time and a half when you work it, and then when you take it, I have to pay time and a half to cover you. So it's a compounding issue. And so while we said that this wouldn't come on the backs of laborers, there's negotiations has this process. Yeah, sure. Because 3% of 50 wasn't available at the time. So anyway, yeah, I wrote that contract. Pat Cook did not put something together. So when we're at the table, I handed him a completed document, and that's what we went with. And then I remember immediately Rice says, oh, and we want 3% of 50. And I was shocked. Martinez says, well, 3% of 50 is not in your contract. And Brian point blank said, no 3% of 50, no merger.
And here we are.
And here we are. Which is interesting, because some of the institutional knowledge behind that retirement system, when I worked with Rancho, we were in a private system. We were with Aetna. And one of the big drives behind our personnel merging with Citrus Heights is they were in PERS. And that was clearly a better system. That contract with PERS was 2% at 50 with a maximum of 75. Yeah, that's what we were all looking for. We were all looking for 2% at 50, 75%. We had deferred comp, and pretty much everybody's plan was to make up that 25% with deferred comp. 9/11 happens. There's a whole backstory, I don't know if you're interested or not, of why we got to 3% of 50. Through the 80s and 90s, investments, we were in a boom. The big 80s, lots of money was being made. And the League of California Cities said, look, if this is like an insurance policy, shouldn't our interest above and beyond our premiums go into the system, and that is below cover our cost? And so there were a number of cities, I think Riverside was one of them, don't hold me to that, but there were a number of agencies that were what is considered superfunded. They were not paying into the system because the interest was covering their premiums.
Covering everything for them.
They were covering everything. Mm-hmm. On our side of the deal, by law, we're required to pay into the system. But it also states that we can negotiate that away. So we were 100% funded because we had negotiated away gained the ability for the agency to pay our employee contribution, which now I don't believe you guys are 100%. You now pay into it. Yep. Mm-hmm. Towards the end of the 90s, we started saying, wait a minute, That's our money. The agency should still be putting into paying the premium, our cost. They're not paying anything. And so we were able to lobby the 3% of 50. We need that back. And so that's where 3% of 50 was born, to recoup what agencies had not been putting in for at least a decade. It turns out that it's not sustainable.
It's difficult.
Yeah, yeah. One of the fascinating things that occurred during the merger, we're now creating a new agency, right? Mm-hmm. And so an actuary has to be done. We did not know the rate that we were going to be paying into PERS, which was one of the holdups on the 3% of 50. So an actuary is done based on the age of your employees, their mortality rate, and all of that's taken into consider, and then the price is done. Just like an insurance policy, you have options that you can buy. Umbrella options to cover, any art or anything like that. And that's how PERS works. PERS, you have an actuary's done, you're given a rate for a basic product. And there are options within that product, 2% of 50, 55, 30, 3% of 50, which is no longer available. 3% of 50 was a premium product. Interestingly enough, when 3% of 50 came out, the cap was still at 75. Within a month, legislation went through to a not compulsory, but a optional 80%, and then almost immediately thereafter, a compulsory 90%. So it changed rapidly.
Yeah.
On top of those products, we were able to get the EPMC, which previously some AR chiefs were indicted on. 2 guys were indicted on and convicted is now legal. What they were doing was employee paid member contribution. What they were doing was giving the employee their cost to pay into the retirement system, and then they would take it from their salary and pay it. So it inflated their salary by 9%. And at the time, it was not legal, and because it's fraud. You're fraudulently inflating a person's salary that they're going to retire on. We changed the law and created the EPMC, the Employee Paid Members Contribution, of 9%. That's the maximum that an employee has to pay. That's required by law. At which point we had, like I was saying earlier, we had negotiated that away and we were paying 0.
Let's talk about things like cutting holes on roofs. I want to get into truck stuff with you.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
We've touched on it a couple of times.
Yeah. Scooting around because then I'm detouring on to different stuff.
So I appreciate the historical perspective. That's actually one of the great things about these interviews is the knowledge that we gain about how did we get where we are.
Right. Every rule is created because somebody screwed up. They don't make random rules just to piss people off. Yep.
And here we are.
And here we are.
Yeah. Truck stuff.
Yep.
The trucks came in force in the late 90s.
Yep.
Truck becomes a fully staffed position in the predecessor agencies.
Yep.
We become Metro Fire.
Keep in mind, we don't have a bid process yet. So the trucks are implemented before bidding becomes an ability within our agency. So at least in Sac County, you're assigned.
Which makes the bids look really nice because we get to choose where we go now.
Yes, absolutely.
In the 90s, you didn't have that option.
No. Up until, I think it was the 97 or 98 contract. Because there was a time there when AR, we missed it by 1 vote. In 98, AR and county were going to merge. And we missed it by 1 vote. And we were aligning our contracts to make it easier. AR had a bid process. Florin was already a part of AR. Fair Oaks had already come in 94 to Sac County. But we did not have a bid process. You were assigned.
What are some lessons that you learned over the years on the truck that really stuck with you?
My takeaway has always been when cutting a hole in a roof, cut it the same way every time. You get good at something by doing it a lot for a long time in any application. You get great at something by paying attention to the details, and to be an expert or excellent is really genetics. I cut the hole the same way every single time. I saw people trying to stab their bar in and just watch it roll away. They were taught that. I never thought it worked. I always thought that if you bring it in at the 45 or at the 90 of the roller pin and roll it in, it does two things. One, it's going to go into the material easier, and two, it's going to bring your bar into an upright position. The more upright your bar is, the more you're going to be able to feel rafters. So I always rolled it in at the 90 at the roller pin at the end of the bar, rolling it up. My next move was to always push away. That's going to find, it's by pushing your bar away instead of dragging it, it's going to put the motor head in an upright position, your bar at a 90 degree to the surface. You're going to, because all that material is there, you're going to find your first rafter. Whether it's a rafter or a truss, doesn't make any difference. You have the most amount of material against wood. Now I know that from that point, my next rafter or truss is going to be 24 away, 16 or 24, depending on the age of the construction. That's awesome. I mean, I've got a lot of information in one cut. Come back to my start, feel your next rafter, roll it. Some people bring it up and over. I think it's just as easy to roll it over. You'll find your next rafter and bring it down. Cross your cuts so that you don't have any kerf material left. By having that top spread, you're limited whether it's a 32 or a 48, right? Mm-hmm. Based on construction, you're going to be limited to that top unless you do something different. So make your next cut as long as possible. You don't want to be making 5 or 6 steps, but don't just cut to your side. Make it at least as big as what you've done. So now I've got an L, I can just finish the next one and repeat it. I cut almost all of my holes that way. There are other methods, and it's good to know other methods, but you'll be great at something when you do it a lot for a long time and pay attention to those details.
Let's say you've got a new firefighter who has just completed the TRQ process and now they're on the truck with you.
Right.
And they're eager, they want to learn, they're ready to learn, they absorb material well, but they don't have the experience.
Right.
For the first 48 hours, what do you think and you need to tell them to get through the 48 hours, you get a job like that?
Yep. The very first thing you've got to know where everything is on your rig, period. Hearing doors slam because somebody's stressed and pressured to, hey, go get me the crib set, and they open 3 compartments, you've failed already. You've got to know where everything is on the rig so that you open 1 compartment and get it. That's a hard job with our trucks. There's enough stuff on there there's stuff that shouldn't be on there. But know where everything is. That's your first task. And keep knowing. Along on that same line, don't move anything because it's more convenient for you. I chewed a guy out who was in your exact scenario, 48 hours, just got his TRQ. He took the set of irons and put them up by his rig. Shift change comes by and I'm looking for the irons. And I said, hey, did we lose some equipment? And he goes, no, not that I know of. I'm looking for the irons. He goes, oh, I put them in my rig. I go, motherfucker, don't ever do that again. These trucks are supposed to be the same from battalion to battalion. If it's convenient for you while you do it, rock on. I don't care. But when you get off shift, put it back. That's where I expect it to be, because I know at 7:50, when the tone goes off and you want me to take it for you, I get off the rig and I go to where it's supposed to be and it's not, we're gonna have a problem. Know where everything is, keep everything in its place. The next thing is know how everything works. If you don't know how something works, don't be touching it. Come along's a perfect example. I see guys unwinding a come along and then winding it back up in a bird's nest. Come alongs are designed for that cable to not be pinched. It has to be wound within its reel in a certain way. If it's pinched, that cable's no longer functional. It's out of service. And many occasions I would find a come along that's in a bird's nest. Know where stuff is, don't move stuff, and know how stuff works.
Over the course of 6 months, what do you, Kyle Thomas, want to work on with this firefighter to get them up to what we could call a 6-month truck firefighter level?
They should be able to know how to vent a roof. That cut at 6 months, you may have never gone on a fire. That's a total reality. But you should have cut a hole every month. That's only 6 holes, and it doesn't happen. You should be on a prop as often as possible so that motion becomes muscle memory. There's no such thing, but the reality is you should know exactly what your saw is doing, how it feels. Any opportunity you can get on a roof that's for a demo, yeah, cut. Yep. Then you should know how to rehab your saw. Down to taking the needle bearings out, taking both sides off. Do you need to go down to a head? No. But yeah, that saw needs to be spotless. That's how they operate way better that way.
What else during your first 6 months with this firefighter do you want to work with them on?
So if we go into the three most common aspects of truck operations are ventilation, search, and extrication. So they should know exactly how to set up the Hurst tool.
You need to know your equipment. Again,
Need to know your
tie
equipment.
back into that.
Yep. Need to know not just its operational capacities, know how to put it together, know how to maintain it, know how to service it, but appropriate use, like on a spreader. I've seen many guys try to use it as a piercing tool, and it's not designed. When you think about it, as you move, if you're designed to, or if your intention is to pierce, to create a purchase point, all of that load is being transferred back into the device, and it's not meant to carry that load. It's meant to spread. That's all it's meant to do. So it's not, you make sure you have your purchase point before you open it up.
What else on extrication did you see over the years? Any tips?
Yeah, we spend an inordinate amount of time using, training on something that we hardly ever use, flapping a roof. If we're moving within a golden hour, we want that patient out. And so our accessibility is secondary, and that's all a roof does. Flapping a roof, all it does is create accessibility for us. We've got to get the steering wheel and dashboard out of the way. We've got to get the seat back. One of the coolest things, I think, about extrications, every single one's going to be different. When you get on a roof and cut a hole, roof construction's pretty much the same. Pitch might be different. The material on top's going to be different. But you cut a hole, you cut a hole, unless it's commercial. And even then, those are similar. But an extrication presents a unique problem every single time. And I think that's fascinating. So yeah, it's knowing where the patient is entangled. Spend a little time finding out what's keeping that patient from coming out. Before, we have to access the patient, so the door's got to come off. Roofs, I've never seen to be that useful, but the door's definitely got to come off. And then seat back, dash up, or whatever order is the most important.
Sure. And then observe what the car does as you start to peel it off.
Right.
And adjust then.
Right, because there's loaded energy there, right? Stabilize your vehicle. Think that something's going to happen. The world of electrical vehicles now, it's going to be fascinating how you deal with that.
I agree.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. The fire is out of these batteries too. Let's talk search real quick. We talked about the three primary things that you're going to work on with this firefighter.
Yep. So I'm of the opinion that splitting isn't good. And my reasonings for that is you can accomplish a search with 2 people. Doing a rescue with 2 people is difficult. So if you've got 4 people in there, the captain on the radio, listening to communication. If I'm searching, if you're task-oriented, being able to listen to tactical and command issues is impossible at best. I'm focused on what I'm doing. I'm not paying attention to the radio. That may make me a bad firefighter, but personally, I think it's impossible. If I'm cutting a hole in a roof, if I'm got the hook, I'm not paying attention to the radio.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is that's the captain's job. The captain's job is to be eyes and ears on the roof, which means he's now taken out of the task. I think that's appropriate. On a search, if the way it was, the 2 of us are going in, the tick changed the game for us, right? It was usually going to be without a tick, you're going right or left and making right hands and turns all the way until you come back out. That's the way I was taught. Prior to the tick, that's the way I executed a search. That's really a tactic of a secondary search. A primary search should be going in to the least likely and survivability profile to which you can access, and then coming right back out. With a tick, that makes it possible. You can go into a survivability profile that's low and work in a logical area that's increasing in survivability. 2 options that I would have with the firefighter is a tick led or a tick directed. Tick led is both of you are going in. The lead has the tick, and you're working as a team to clear a room. Tick directed, the person with the tick is at the doorway, and the other person goes in and clears a room. But the direction is giving communication with the search that's inside. The problem with that, unless you go in and shut the door behind you, the tactic is to go into the room, shut the door, clear the room, vent the room, opening the windows, removing the screen. Chances are you're going to miss somebody. We've missed people. So let's increase the survivability profile of that room that we've searched. Next room. Go in the door, shut the door, increase its survivability profile in the process of searching, get out of the door, that room, close the door. That's a primary search. Every room is done that has a survivability profile. And then your secondary is a systematic right-hand only turn. I don't know how it's done now, but that's the way I would approach it if I had a firefighter with me, and that's what our task was.
Yeah, and this is a huge topic in our department right now, search.
Yeah.
And it should be.
Yep. Yeah.
That's why the fire department exists in the first place.
Right. So which is interesting. So in if I were king and I'd do away with split, you'd have we've got, if I'm not correct, there's still 2 truck companies coming on a fire. Whatever the highest priority is, that's what the first truck takes. So if it's vent, then that truck goes to a vent. The second truck is responsible for search. How would I do it with a 4-person company? You've got 2 ticks on the truck, correct? You have 2 teams of 2 that can go in that do exactly the same process. If I went back to my statement of the captain being the eyes and ears, he's now taken out of that task, and now you have a 3-person group. So 2 with the tick, 1 probably the least experienced, moving around as a team. So you've got 3 people in a room that have to either miss or walk over a victim, but you're also ventilating, captain's got the radio, and yeah. My nightmare was a 2-person search, finding a victim, and it's 600 pound or 400 pound.
Right.
I'm 150 wet.
Yeah.
Me and another person ain't gonna move that 400. And now I gotta get on my radio and communicate with command.
Get more people in.
Get more people in. Now this is a flood of resources that may not even be available to me.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a 3 or a 4 doing it, that rescue's initiated immediately.
Which is why we're here.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Do you check boxes as command by splitting with lower resources? Yeah. And you're going to get away with it until there's a problem.
To be continued. This is a much longer topic
Yeah.
that we could go on about. This would be a good professional development program class. We've got a series of classes now that we put on, and
Yeah. Obviously, it's just my opinion from one guy that's on the bottom rung of the ladder. I loved doing my job, and I thought I was good at it. I don't say I was great. I certainly wasn't an expert. I don't have the genetics. I wasn't 6 foot. I'm not a Kevin Wagner. It's just not my build. But you can get away with a lot with knowledge. If you know what you're doing, yeah, you can go a long way.
speaking of that knowledge, thanks for coming in, Kyle.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming in and talking with us today.
Yeah, for sure.
With that, Metro Fire, thanks for joining us. This is Kyle Thomas, retired firefighter from Metro Fire, 26 years in the fire service, 28 years in the fire service, 26 years here.
Yeah.
Lots of time on the truck. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.